Look, and I want to thank Mr. Doherty for being with us here today. It's not an easy thing to come before an Oireachtas committee, but your willingness to do so is very much appreciated. Can I also say at the outset, I want to join with you in acknowledging the huge work of Peter McVerry himself, a constituent of mine and somebody I know who has done tremendous work, but also the many, many people within the Trust that I imagine have lived with this shadow over the work that they do, and there should be no shadow. They do incredible work. So I suppose the reason we're here is because of a 15 million bailout effectively to an organisation that you found yourself appointed to and to take control from the 1st of June, Mr. Doherty. You'd worked there for a number of decades, and I imagine you were incredibly hopeful about the time that you could serve as CEO. But on the 29th of May, you found yourself in a public park, having just returned from annual leave. You were there with the outgoing CEO and you had concerns regarding a number of payments. Can you tell us about those?
Yep, thank you, Deputy. So the payments that you're referencing relate to money that was originally received by Peter McVerry Trust from the Captain Day Centre through a multi-million donation agreement worth 4.7 million. Those funds were received by the organisation in and around October 2022, and they were for specified or restricted use for the purchase of properties related to homeless services or housing for homeless individuals. When I was on leave, I received an email, or I was copied on an email from a member of the finance team at Peter McVerry Trust showing the level of funds available across all the different bank accounts. And this came the day after payroll had been met for the organisation. So the organisation's payroll was 2.4 million. There was a monthly contribution to revenue of 1.1 million. So 1.1, 1.2. So before you paid a creditor, it was 3.6 million just to run the organisation each month. So that email showed that one of the bank accounts, which was for social housing projects, had been emptied of over 2 million. And then it also showed the Captain donation account was effectively at zero. There might have been a few €100.
And was it clear to you, or is it clear to you now, where that money had gone?
At the time, it wasn't clear, so it prompted me to ask a finance employee for copies of the Captain donation account, the ledger. That ledger then showed that money had been transferred out on the 16th of December to a related entity that Peter McVerry Trust had taken over, the Assisi charity, Assisi CLG. And once I realised that's where the money went, I asked the same finance employee for a copy of the ledger for Assisi CLG. And then it showed that immediately, having received that money, Assisi transferred the funds to two entities, Rubicon and New Directions.
And had Rubicon carried out work for Assisi?
No, they hadn't. So part of my remit as housing development was to look at the redevelopment of the main Assisi property on the Navan Road for long-term housing and a new head office for the organisation. So I was familiar with it. I'd visited with architects, feasibility studies, so I knew that.
Can you clarify what that payment amounted to?
The Rubicon received a payment of €1 million and a payment of 150,000, and New Directions paid 350,000.
Yeah, let me get to those two payments then. So the €1 million was taken from the restricted account with Peter McVerry Trust, was transferred to Assisi, and was subsequently on the same day transferred to Rubicon for work that Assisi hadn't incurred. Why was that money transferred to Assisi?
So the explanation that I was given at the time by my predecessor on the day that you originally referred to was that it was for prepayment against works that were going to be done. Then it was the picture shifted to it was actually in order to help that contractor deal with cash flow pressures that had built up because the trust had substantial liabilities to it at that point. And then,
but the trust had rather than Assisi.
Yes, exactly. And the contractor, then it was advised that actually the works have now been completed to that value, so it was a moot point effectively. But I challenged that. I said I didn't feel like there was any great value in the works that had been undertaken at Assisi, and then arranged to meet my predecessor and the contractor at the site, and subsequently.
Let me return to that. So then the second payment was a payment of €350,000 to a company, a private company, New Directions. Can you tell me about your understanding of that?
So my understanding of New Directions is that they're a private company that provide counselling services. My predecessor, the long-term CEO, had announced that he was going to work for that entity when he left the trust. The 350,000.
So the outgoing CEO of the Peter McVerry Trust was taking up a new employment with New Directions, and this payment was made from the Peter McVerry Trust to a non-charitable private company called New Directions.
Exactly.
And can you tell me, why would anyone in the Peter McVerry Trust or the board or anybody else approve a payment of that nature to a non-charitable company?
I suppose the fact is nobody knew about it. It was done at the instruction of the then CEO in December 22. It's in the conversation I had with him on that date in late May, a couple of days before becoming CEO. He originally explained that it was related to an understanding by New Directions that they were to benefit in some way from the caption donation to Peter McVerry Trust for works on their properties. But then by the end of the conversation, it had shifted to my predecessor saying that the funds were actually to make sure that New Directions had sufficient funds to pay his salary for the coming years while they applied for charitable status.
Again, not in the interest of the Peter McVerry Trust or the people who donated to the Peter McVerry Trust?
No, and in breach of the agreement with Caption Day Centre.
Okay, and I think my colleagues might follow up with the financial controls that would allow that sort of arrangement to be put in place. Mr. Doherty, there's so many aspects of the evidence that we have in front of us, so many different properties. The Cardiffstown House property is the one, I suppose, that I thought in some ways summed up some of what was going on. Cardiffstown House was a historic period property in Kildare, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, it previously been owned by the St Vincent de Paul, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. The amount of money that seems to have been spent on Cardiffstown House to me seems exceptional. There was improvements to the driveway, is that correct?
Yeah, there was over 300,000 at one point spent on resurfacing and widening the driveway up to the period.
There was money spent on a lift, not a first lift, but a second lift for the property, is that correct?
Yeah, there was a resurfacing and widening the driveway up to the period.
There was money spent on a lift, not a first lift, but a second lift for the property, is that correct?
Yeah, there was a unauthorised lift shaft being constructed on the side of the period property by under the instruction of my predecessor.
Why would a lift shaft be constructed at the side of a property?
I suppose the information we were given was that the CEO did not want service or staff in the basement in the commercial kitchen using the same entrance as him on the building. So it was a separate lift to access that commercial kitchen, even though there was a lift.
It turned out that those works were not in compliance with planning.
There was no planning application, there was no technical or architectural support, there was no engineering support. It was an agreement between my predecessor and the contractor, which was referenced in the prior payments to ACC.
Like in all of the different improvements to the property, and as I say, it's a historic property, the one I was least expecting was a peacock enclosure.
Yeah, I suppose Cardiffstown House became almost a symbol of the things that were going wrong with, and maybe a sense of loss of control. The service itself was losing €1 million a year. It had a maintenance budget under its SLAs with the local authorities for about 100 to 125,000, roughly at €1,000 per person per year. But when myself and my deputy came into office, we got access to invoices, so we could see that there was payments to construct a peacock enclosure at the front of the property for 2 peacocks. There was the widening of the driveway for 300,000. There was 6,000 to 7,000 being spent.
So can I ask it's a daft question. Why in God's name would anybody donate money to the Peter McVerry Trust, or anybody in the trust think it was permissible or of good value to the service users to have a peacock enclosure, albeit in a historic property?
Absolutely, it's indefensible that anybody would think that it was appropriate to
Can I
use funds
ask
that way.
one final question, Mr. Brady? The other thing that's a common theme is the conflicts of interest that arose. As I've asked you about Rubicon, and others may ask you about other conflicts, there does appear to be a conflict of interest in regards to Rubicon. Can you tell us about what your understanding of that conflict would be?
So the conflict of interest that existed was that the auditor of Peter McVerry Trust for 17 years was actually the brother of the principal or owner of Rubicon, which became the Trust's main maintenance contractor, and which paid several million euro for maintenance works over several years. There was also a conflict of interest in that the long-term auditor and his brother sold properties to Peter McVerry Trust in 2018. Those properties didn't comply with building regulations at the time. There was no Part 5 agreement. There were substantial defects, but the CEO at the time in 2018 agreed to buy those with the Trust's own money for $975,000 and later paid Rubicon over $300,000 of the Trust's own funds to remedy defects which they were responsible for fixing in the first place.
In many ways, the peacocks were the least of your worries.
Yeah,